I'm trying to dispel these hierarchies, especially within painting. I found my own particular way through this, like mark making and placing colours next to each other. The marks I'm making are quite intuitive. Certain marks might be coming forward, certain marks might be going back. So I'm also thinking about this idea of the viewer's eye going in and out of the piece, this internal aspect of the figure and the individual, the self, all that sort of stuff. So I'm interested in this idea of colour not just being filler. There might be a lot happening within the figure, but I'm like, okay, maybe if I have this block of colour, that's where the eyes rest. I think one thing that kind of bothers me is the loss of the non-physical in our contemporary world, because everything's very material and like in the present and in the now. But then I'm like, there's this whole other side of human experience that's intangible and non-physical that we can't necessarily describe. The expression of something beyond ourselves, you know, it's the search for God, or it's whether it's religious practice or whatever it is. So I'm interested in how the work can kind of express some of those ideas and how we can find ways to kind of tap into that. I've been kind of like actively trying to be like, okay, yeah, look, there's this big, large-scale watercolour piece, and it can be a serious painting. My name is Richard Ayodeji Ikhide. I'm at the Jackson studio, and we'll be looking into my practice, which is mostly based around fine art and drawing, large-scale watercolour paintings as well. I'm endlessly fascinated by just making a line. I know it sounds simple, but it's that thing of like, yeah, you put a pen on a piece of paper or a surface, you pull it across, you make a line. It's like, wow, mind-blowing. Living in Lagos, Nigeria. 5 years old, I started making marks, trying to draw. It's quite funny, I draw on the walls of my grandparents' house. We're from Sabongida Ora, which is a group within the Edo region. The story is that we were kind of part of the king, like the Oba, who's called the king's brothers, and one of his sons had gone off to create his own kind of kingdom. We have quite an interesting history, and then obviously, you know, things like the Benin bronzes, which are a large part of like Edo Benin history. I think even in terms of things like textiles and colour, things like folk tales, my granddad would tell me a lot of like folk tales and stories from Benin, and that's been quite influential. Having lived half of my life back home in Lagos and then living half of my life in England, so you get this amalgamation of different experiences, which then, you know, because I love things like, okay, I'm looking at loads of African art all across the continent, but then I'm looking at people like El Greco or Blake's, or, you know, more Western influences. So you get this weird like intermingling of cultures and identity and hybridity. So it's, yeah, I think that's been fascinating to bring both sides of who I am into the work and find connections. How I paint with watercolours isn't the conventional method or way of working with the medium. So I found my own particular way through this, like mark making and placing colours next to each other to then form a figure or form the body, all that sort of stuff. So I've sort of found my own methodology or my own system of doing this. The drawing is more like conventional. Okay, I'm thinking about lines and where I'm placing things, how the figure sits on the page or on a surface, all that sort of stuff. Yes, I'm looking at tonal values, but I'm also just kind of following my intuition. Okay, this mark looks interesting there, I'll place that next to that, and it all then builds up to create a whole. Yeah, drawing in terms of things like world building and narrative, I'd say from quite an early age was something I kind of engaged in. I had an older cousin who'd bring me comics, and it was like an anthology of like, you know, Superman comics from like the 80s. And I remember like reading it to the point me and my brother, we read it so much, it was like in pieces, you know, so we'd read like bits of it. So it was quite interesting. Then it becomes almost kind of like an old artifact in itself, because it was like all torn and tattered and all that sort of stuff. A lot of the time in exercise books, so we'd have these like lined notebooks I'd use in school, and that's what I'd be drawing in a lot of the time. What was quite funny, you know, I had a few friends in school, in Lagos, in secondary school. We were all really interested in drawing, you know, so I'd make these like knockoff Sonic the Hedgehog comics for my friends in school and I'd like sell them. The idea of the sequence is quite interesting for me, like being obsessed with comics, and then I'd look into art history. There's a whole kind of long history of the sequence and sequential narrative and how that develops into things like film, animation, video games, all that sort of stuff. So I feel like each iteration is just a development of a core idea, which we've been kind of chasing as human beings for a very, very long time. You know, I start off with a drawing and then I'm thinking of these different topographies. I've been drawing a lot with like a fountain pen. I use this Pentel fountain pen. I'm just, you know, your standard 3B, 4B, 5B to 6B. Perfect, you know. It's the feedback you get from the pencil, your hand, your eyes. There's a series of processes. Recently, I've been drawing with just a pen, just like a writing pen, quite a lot, because also there's that nice flow you get with ballpoint pens. I'm pressed for time a little bit, so I'm like, okay, quick, I need to get this drawing down. So I'm not thinking as much. I'm just kind of in the drawing. The mark's there, you can't change it now. I'm also using a lot of dip pens for drawing because I've been looking at a lot of like Tiepolo. Older Tiepolo's etching. So I was in Venice last year, so I got to access some archives and look at some Dura copies of prints. So I've been making these quite like tight cross-hatching pieces. Drawing is, for me, it's a lot of problem solving. Okay, how do I solve this problem? Okay, there's figures here. What are they doing? Okay, in relation to this other thing in the background, how does that all work? And it's the interplay of these different elements coming together as a whole. It connecting to the first marks we ever made as human beings, you know, that is, I always think about this idea of like cave paintings or who's the first human being to draw in the sand. I'm using these scroll brushes from Karate, so they do a range of these natural scroll brushes. They really pick up the pigment as well, whereas I found with some other brands of watercolor brushes, they don't pick up the pigment as much, and then you have these weird little dots, and the way the pigment settles on the paper doesn't feel great. Scroll brushes only go up to a certain range, so if you're filling in a large area, it's going to take ages. So I've been using Chinese calligraphy brushes because you can get them quite large as well. And there's this really Zen meditative thing of like there's a flow with the brush in terms of how it glides across. Whereas, okay, with an oil brush, there's a bit of a drag. Even with canvas, you know, the canvas texture is very different. Yeah, I'd say scale's quite important. I was using pans and then I switched to tubes. The issue I was having because of the scale I'm working at with watercolors, to be honest, I mean, I wish I could get watercolor tubes that are bigger than the tiny ones. You know, one thing I'm trying to do is like, okay, yeah, show watercolors as a medium, because a lot of my time in art school is like, okay, serious painting is all painting. But I'm like, well, not necessarily, you know, yeah, serious painting could also take another form. Only hot press. At the moment, I buy a Saunders Waterford 2-meter roll from Jackson's Art, actually, and it's just an amazing feeling when you have a squirrel brush on a hot press paper. The way the brush moves and glides across the surface, like chef kiss, you know, it's amazing. And in terms of grammage, sort of like 300, 400, because the paper also has to be quite thick and take a good beating, especially if you're going to use watercolors and a lot of water and still retain its form as well. There is no mysticism behind the way the piece takes shape, right? So it's like paper, pigments, because I want people to maybe look at the piece and be like, okay, yeah, that looks something practical that they can do as well. I believe in accessibility when it comes to arts, mediums, all that sort of stuff. And yeah, it's just paper. You know, when I'm making work, I'm in this kind of like meditative flow state and I'm doing things that sometimes I can't explain. I don't want it to sound like, oh, it's like woo-woo or crazy, but I feel like I'm like, okay, yeah, I want to just lose myself in this piece, but then not lose myself to the point where it's like everything's all over the place, but there's like a focus on what I'm trying to do. And because the thing with working with the medium I work with, you know, watercolors can be a bit unforgiving because once you make a mark on the paper, that's it. So going into that process, you have to kind of be really locked in and So what sort of intention am I bringing to this piece? And I want somebody to look at the piece and be like, oh yeah, okay, this part, I can see the effort, I can see the skill, I can see how meticulous something is. So it's not an approval thing. It's a thing of like, okay, you want to show that, yeah, you are pursuing something, you're working towards something there. I'm making this in the studio, but it's eventually going to go out into the world and be seen and experienced by others. So how is that experience going to be for them? It's varied, the motivating factors change constantly. But also, of course, I'm enjoying and loving the process, which is why I might, I'll be spend hours and my partner will call me, oh, you had lunch? I'm like, no, I've just been paying. So she's like, go and have lunch. So it's like, yeah, that pure joy of making a line or painting or using color, you get lost in the flow of the process as well. Coming to England, it was an interesting experience. I think one thing that was funny was going to the British Museum. And I'm like, oh wow, okay, these are the things my granddad told me about, and they're these, they're lauded as these really important aspects of African history because we were colonized by the British. Yeah, it was fascinating to then, come to England, go to college, and you meet people from different backgrounds, then on to university, and that, widens the scope of what I was exposed to. So you're in this particular zeitgeist of this culture, and then you come out and then your world's expanded. That, just broadens the horizons for what's possible in terms of imagination, how you see yourself. How I see it, each person's life is a myth in itself. You're on your own odyssey, on your own journey, and what that means for you. So maybe there's reoccurring characters, or I'm also trying to make recognizable elements that people can go back to and reference. Okay, yeah, this means this, or that means that, or that's the child self. And one thing I found is like a lot of the figures I was working with maybe border into this line of like androgyny. This idea of like, the anima or the animus, which are the feminine or masculine counterparts of the psyche. Maybe that's me trying to understand an aspect of myself and, how that plays into who I am as an individual. Because I feel like a lot of the characters and figures I'm working with are all versions of myself, Yes, we are the physical body, but the physical body is how we experience the world around us as well. So everyone's perception is different, based on the context of where you've grown up. A large thing in terms of themes and context for the work is looking at, human history. I use circles quite a lot when we think about atoms or we think about the womb. It's a universal shape that I think relates to a lot of people. So they're points to kind of hone in or focus on, or for the viewer to kind of meditate on that point. At first, I wanted to be an archaeologist, and I was saying to a friend of mine how I feel like my practice is a form of visual archaeology. How do we find ways to kind of amalgamate and find commonalities? That's kind of what I'm really trying to bring across in referencing these different artifacts or things from different cultures. Is I think maybe it's a bit of like a utopian thing I'm trying to do, or idealist, I don't know. Studying textiles at Central St. Martin's was an experience very different to what I'm doing now, because I had this whole grand plan of going into menswear and out of my foundation. But as with life, everything changes. After experiencing the industry and experiencing that course, I was like, a lot of what I was doing on my time there was geared more towards visual art. And I kept running into issues with tutors like, okay, you're making art, you're not necessarily making textiles. And during my time was, once again, heavily involved in drawing. And during my final year, I was working on linen quite a lot, which is quite fascinating. You might end up using like 8 different screens because you're trying to create this print. So this idea of like layering was quite interesting. And I guess it's something that's fed into working with watercolours, particularly because I'm dealing with these ideas of transparency, translucency, and like building up layers of color. Then going into like my fine art practice, I could take some of those sensibilities and ideas around color, pattern, texture into the work I was making. There's certain go-to colors I love when it comes to like watercolors, gouache: cadmium red, cadmium yellow, brilliant purple, cobalt blue, cobalt teal. So I love red's my favorite color. I love red. It's that thing of like, I'm trying to create identifiers just because I just love the tone or the shades of those. But then I can also tint them, mix them with other colors and all sorts of stuff. So I also get worried about kind of like being locked into a particular system. I mean, systems are useful, but, you know, sometimes there's a danger of like being repetitive and like, you know, I try and be as open as I can in terms of a range of color. And because of the mattness of the gouache, you get this like really this zing of the color, especially in terms of like the luminosity and how bright it is. It's quite fascinating sometimes. Like, okay, if I'm working across these like translucent layers of color and then I have like something matte or quite bright, this thing of like your eyes going in and out of a piece. So yeah, color doesn't just become a filler. I'm also thinking about the associations we have and how these temperatures affect what the viewer is looking at. Moving my practice into a fine art direction, this happened after I'd left St. Martin. So I did a few textile internships, a couple of studios, and it wasn't for me. I think a lot of what I was doing was like, okay, you know, we've got these patterns of birds or flowers. Could you do drawings of them so we can make a print? It was just like working in retail. And I'd seen a brochure for the drawing year. The course was kind of like, okay, you know, if you want to have this change or this transition into this fine art practice, it's a good way to kind of do that. And it's a free course. So I said, okay, great. I think what's great is that the faculty there, it's quite varied and you get all these different experiences and insights from people. This big focus on observational drawing, which is something I wasn't doing a lot of at the time, because I was drawing from my imagination quite a lot when I applied to the school. And I remember going for my interview and like, you know, she was like, okay, yeah, this is interesting. But, you know, I think there was the idea of like, okay, there could be more if you're drawing from observation a bit more and how that can enhance all these ideas within my, you know, imagination. So, and then you start to find your friends, these artists who you can rely on. It's not that you can necessarily go and meet them, but reading up on them or studying, there were many ways, and I was introduced to expanding my practice and thinking about my practice in different ways. And yeah, just kind of giving me that breathing room, you know, because it's different when you're working by yourself and okay, you know, it can be quite difficult. But I think when you have that pastoral care, people kind of looking at your practice from the outside, they're able to maybe point you in the right direction and yeah, guide you, you know. The sketchbook is like a visual library. It's a visual grimoire where I keep all these references or images or things I can kind of pull from to influence the work. So yeah, sketchbook is like super, super important because I've been keeping sketchbooks since I was a kid, you know, a teenager, into college, all that sort of stuff. So I think sketchbooks are like essential and paramount to my practice. There's a process of planning. So like I might be looking at a reference image for a figure or a pose I want. All the other elements come together around the figure. I'd make drawings in the sketchbook and those drawings end up becoming paintings, but there might be other edits. Sometimes I'm a bit worried of repeating myself. So I'm like, okay, I want to keep things fresh. My partner would say to me sometimes, she'd be like, oh, why don't you just use that drawing? But I'm like, no, I need it to be new. So it's that weird kind of like push and pull of like, okay, sometimes I have all these drawings I could turn into paintings, but then I'm also like, no, I need, you know, it's the next new thing. I don't always have access to the life room. So my Pinterest has over, I think 5,000 pins because I keep saving all these references to understand a pose. If I feel like I'm not really getting the pose, I'll just assume the pose myself just to see how that feels. I've been using my hands a lot because I might want a figure doing a particular hand gesture. So I'd take a quick photo of my hand doing that gesture and then I'll do the drawing. So I've been teaching at the Royal Drawing School, and in between teaching you can do a quick little drawing of the figure while you're teaching a class. So that's been my way of accessing the life room, so in little ways. But yeah, I might make edits, but I'm kind of at the point where it's like, if it's not working, I'll just start over again. One thing I try to refrain from is using an eraser too much. I try not to, because I just believe, like, you know, in that idea of accepting the piece for what it is and letting it be as well. And if it's not working, we trash the whole thing, we start again. So I'm kind of like being really sure of what I'm doing, and I have to really focus and be in that piece is super important, especially if you're going to work on something again. It changes every time, like it's firing different synapses in my brain and different hemispheres and all that sort of stuff. So I think there's something kind of liberating and kind of like letting go and just like, yeah, I'll just start again. It's not the end of the world. Now, because of my practice, I've been making this particular type of work for a little while. Once I have my colored banded border around the piece and the lines holding the figure, I kind of know when the piece is finished. But obviously there are moments where things can be overdone and I'm like, oh god, I can't pull that back, or I can't, so with watercolors it's like you get to a point where the paper can't take anymore. So it's more like maybe the pressures of like, okay, I need to get this done, because in the past 2 years I've been quite busy in terms of like work and shows. So it's like, okay, I need to get this thing ready for this particular time. So that's been a motivator in terms of, okay, just getting myself into the process and being involved. My current studio space is a second bedroom at home. Right now it's like baby toys on the floor, my materials, my shelf of books, my video games. So it's a home studio, it's like it's an intermingling of home life and trying to get some semblance of work. But yeah, that's in between diaper changes and all the other duties of being a parent. But I've been doing drawings of my daughter recently, so that's been quite fun. But it's like, okay, stay still, please let me get that on. But it's not easy. There's certain days, like if I have a deadline or I'm working towards something, I'm like, okay, yeah, get into the studio, just start making work. But if it's maybe of like more of a regular day, I spend a bit of time it's probably like the first hour or two, I might just be like chilling. And how I see it, it's like, like I say, little drops make a mighty ocean. So I'm like, okay, do a little bit today, a little bit. And then before you know, a piece is done. So at current times, most especially having a child now, if I have that period of time to make work, okay, yep, go, I need to like get this done. It was cozy, to have like a cozy space is my kind of like fortress of solitude, just to kind of like sit there, hone in, delve into work and just kind of like, yeah, have my time, Music is like a big kind of like thing for me in the studio. At the moment I'm painting to baby sounds, it's on a normal studio setting I'd be, I listen to music a lot. I have a favorite maybe hip-hop artist. It would be like MF Doom. I love like British punk, Peter and the Test Tube Babies, all that sort of stuff. Jazz, a lot of video game music as well. I might have like quite intense periods where I'm like, yeah, it's like Henry Rollins. I try and vary it up really. And a lot of the times I'd just watch documentaries, so I'd have something in the background, maybe documentaries on ancient civilizations, aliens, all sorts of stuff. More in recent times, I've been feeling like I really need natural light. Just, yeah, especially when you're dealing with like, because the watercolor pigments and like gouache pigments are so rich. You have that yellow light in the home. I've been finding it's messing with the colors. So I'm like, no, there's this yellow tinge on everything. In terms of influences and key artists, Kerry James Marshall, I feel like he's basically started a whole movement of figurative painting. Ernst Fuchs, Viennese artist, amazing artist, exploring ideas around Jewish mysticism, a lot of kind of metaphysical ideas, also looking back at history as well, which is quite interesting. Somebody else I love again is Dürer, mainly for the world building element and how he's able to create these narratives within his pieces. There's another artist called Hendrik Goltzius. He's an engraver, super detailed, super meticulous pieces. Hieronymus Bosch is another one who's quite cool, really interesting artist. There's an artist called Yoshitaka Amano. He's a Japanese artist, but he was making a lot of character designs and concept art for a video game series called Final Fantasy, and he primarily works within water-based mediums like watercolors. He also uses other mediums, but encountering his work, he was kind of like, oh, light bulb moment for me. I can make watercolors be a serious medium. Another artist I'd say somebody like Mobius is somebody I find him quite fascinating and interesting. He was working primarily within comics and then a bit of film here and there, but his work bridges upon that sci-fi kind of metaphysical realm and brings that all together. I've been teaching a course at the Royal Drawing School called World Imagery. In kind of doing that, I'm always learning. I'm a facilitator, I'm like, okay, I'm helping to facilitate this particular student or individual to find something from themselves. Like, one thing I'm always wary about with education and teaching is I don't want to be this kind of overbearing influence or, like, okay, you have to do things in this particular way. No, I believe like you should be a facilitator. And especially within art education, I think what's fascinating is that, you teach a class of people, 20 students, everybody sees things differently. You give information to a student and then, they develop their own way of seeing things and they turn around, oh, wow, that thing you said was really useful. Like, yeah, amazing. I've done my job, So something I say to students is like, okay, how do you then solve problems within your painting practice or drawing practice, whatever it is go and look at artists, go and look at certain artists, if you're trying to solve a problem. During my time at the drawing, I'd spend a lot of time at the National Gallery. Like, the two main courses for me were like British Museum, National Gallery, because the amazing thing about the times we live in is that we have this huge backlog of references and things we can kind of look at to then influence our future, which is why I'm interested in this idea of the future past, where, even physicists say it, time is a construct, so this idea of looking back and looking forward. I see art as kind of like a chart of the human psyche through history. I'm interested in being able to create something that transcends just you as an individual. It's a big takeaway I take from things like video games and comics, because or somebody like Picasso, right? They've gone from just being within the art world to something in the mainstream and culturally relevant to many different types of people. So I'm always thinking of ways to kind of engender some of that within the work as well. We're not just physical bodies, scientists are still trying to discover, okay, the origins of human consciousness, where that comes from and what we are, who we are, all that sort of stuff. Again, maybe going back to maybe more idealist or utopian ideas, a lot of the issues within the world is that we focus so much on the physical and the material aspect, maybe materialism in terms of, okay, I need to have this and these other people can't have that. Causes a lot of problems. So I'm like, okay, maybe if we focus less on the materialism and like the physical aspect of the world and think about the essence of who we are beyond maybe, physical things like wealth, skin color, gender, all that sort of stuff. Maybe we find something that makes us relate in a different way, because I believe we're more than just our bodies and just, flesh,